In 1978, DC Comics, desperate to stop the juggernaut Marvel Comics had become and retake their position as the dominant publisher in comics, gambled it all on what they called the DC Explosion, a publishing initiative that would see DC debut a wealth of new titles, increase the price of comics, and widen their scope to publish stories with newer, more diverse characters. This strategy failed catastrophically, leading to what would become known as the DC Implosion. What caused the DC Implosion? It's been attributed to everything from poor ideas from editorial to good ideas from editorial that came too soon, price increases, one of the worst blizzards in the history of the United States, a paper shortage, panicked executives, a film delay, and just plain old bad books. It's a whodunit's worth of possibilities, but by the end of this series, you'll understand how each of those things contributed to one of DC's darkest hours. You'll also learn about arguably the most important woman ever in comics, who shaped the future of the industry with her actions and saved DC Comics. This is the history of the DC Comics Explosion, Part 1, Before the Explosion.
All of those things you listed, you could have said that exact list without all of the pretense. It sounded like it could have happened. You could have been talking about last year.
Like a year after New 52 even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking of.
So I love that you said that, Kale. I love that those are the first words not spoken by me, because that is a heavy, heavy theme of this deep dive that we're going to do. And it's a big part of why I chose this topic, because the cyclical nature of the problems in comics is remarkable, and it's never been clearer to me than since I've been doing research for this subject matter. Hello, everyone watching us live. Hello, everyone not watching us or listening to us live. Welcome. Thank you for joining. If you're a fan of comics and you understand the industry, which you come to know just by, being into it for a while, you know that there are certain problems and certain things that come up over and over again. And when I first started researching what we would do after Twilight of the Superheroes, a lot of people recommended the DC Explosion. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what it was. And now that I've learned, I can see how incredibly predictive of the future the events of just really a few, most people say a few short months, but I go back to, most people think it all started in 78, but our story is starting in 76, because I think that's an important year in DC's history. I think it's an important year in comics, and we're going to talk about why. But the problems that DC had in 76 are the same problems it has in 2023. It's actually incredible. So this is what we're going to be tackling for the next few weeks. Go ahead.
When you announced the DC Explosion, I was like, "Yo, did I miss a terrorist attack again?" Like, Jesus Christ, what happened?
That's why I included DC Comics.
Okay.
Explosion.
Well, you know what? I have selective hearing.
Because if you type DC Explosion without comics, it's something very different. So, as we get into this, I want to shout out the book, Comic Book Implosion, an oral history of DC Comics circa 1978 by Keith Dallas and John Wells, and 13thdimension.com, because they did great work serializing the book. This is a book that is out of print, but it is available digitally. It's a great book, and if you're curious about this subject matter, frankly, you're probably going to get most of what you need to get out of the subject from this. But if you want more, you can read the book, and it does have a lot of great interviews and things like that. Some of which we'll be referencing, most of which we're getting just from, people love to talk back then. So there's a lot of material for us to dive into. but it's a fascinating time in DC. Classic Ulysses says 1978. That's when Superman the movie came out. Why? Thank you for bringing that up. You'll hear about that again very soon.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so our story starts with Marvel. Because by 1976, which is considered to be still in the mix of the Bronze Age, Marvel had already overtaken DC in market share. Marvel had a sell-through rate of 70% to DC's 50%. Now, for those of you not sure what a sell-through rate is, that is what it references is the amount of, in this case, comics, but in general, merchandise that is sold to actual consumers.
Sure. So that's comic shops buying it, and 70% of the things they bought actually were purchased. Is that right?
So, in this case, comic book shops are still relatively
Sure.
new,
Newsstands.
and they have a different system. So, when we are talking about sell-through in this case, we're mostly talking about everything else. Places with returnability. And I'll speak more to that a little bit later. But just so you guys know, returnability didn't exist. Newsstands, grocery stores, all that, they mix, and whatever they got, or I'm sorry, returnability was all that existed. My apologies. They got what they got, and if they didn't sell it, they sent it back. So what I'm saying is that with a 50% sell-through rate, DC was barely making money because 50% of the books that they were shipping were getting sent back to them. Whereas Marvel was selling through 70% of their books. So Marvel was kicking DC's ass. And DC was trying to figure out why and what to do about it. And they had all kinds of wonky ideas about the reason. They thought it was because of the use of the color red that Marvel was doing tremendously. They had
Amazing.
wild ideas about why Marvel was doing so well. And it's funny because Stan Lee actually had fun with that. He thought that that was a very funny idea. And so he would do things in the books that would counter whatever he heard DC thought was really the reason why Marvel was doing so well. He would do something different just to fuck with them.
Amazing.
And it's not really a rivalry. Like it's a spirited rivalry. It's not a war.
Both these places, both their headquarters were in New York at the time, right? So
Yeah.
so they would have lunch with each other, you know?
Yeah, the workers and everybody. Go ahead.
This would have been back in the days of the baseball games.
Yeah.
Yeah. The relationship was definitely a lot warmer, I guess you could say, than it would become. A few years later, we got Batman versus Hulk in 1981. So this is around the time where they were happy to do business with each other.
I did not know Batman versus Hulk was a thing. That is good to know.
That's one of the many things that I learned throughout this process. DC's books hadn't been connecting the way Marvel's were. Marvel skewed older, and they were bolder. They were the ones that broke the comics code several times. But by introducing a drug storyline with Harry Osborn, they broke the comics code, and then the comics code changed to accommodate Marvel storytelling, because if they didn't do that, then the code would be null and void and no one else would follow it. And then DC did their drug storyline in Green Arrow, I think it was.
Speedy,
yes.
Speedy doing speed.
Yep. So DC needed to do something different. DC needed to try something else. They decided that they would publish more books because they thought that that was one of the factors to Marvel's big success, would be publishing even more comics. But they ultimately hired Jenette Kahn.
yes, I knew it. Okay, cool.
Look at Marco, who became publisher of DC, on February 2nd, 1976, at 28 years old.
Damn,
If you can believe that.
what? That is wild.
I have
Yeah.
wasted my life.
Should have gotten to editing.
She was notable at the time for having launched 2 publications prior, Kids and Dynamite. She came into the role of publisher swinging and punching right up because her first battle was actually against the top heads of Warner Brothers, who wanted to license the rights to publish stories featuring DC's characters away and fold the publishing division and only do reprints.
What? That's fucking wild.
We have talked about the exact same idea this year. This year. That was a real fear that we had, and frankly, I still have, when the deal with Discovery went down. That they might not see the value in publishing weekly comics. So even as far back as 1976, Jenette Kahn steps into the role and immediately has to fight for DC's existence. So that's the climate we're in. DC's overlords don't think that DC is worth the money. But there is something coming that might make them think differently, which, of course, is Superman the movie. So everybody's holding on to the idea of Superman the movie changing the game. But Jenette Kahn is not happy to wait because she has ideas of her own. So I'm going to refer to her for the first time here. And we're going to do that a lot because Jenette Kahn is a person that a lot of people don't know of, but they should. And you're going to understand why as we get through this process. So this is an interview with Jenette, who was then DC Comics publisher. She did an interview in back issue number 57 in July of 2012. Bill, this is a quote from her. Bill, her boss at the time, said, "We have 4 decades worth of comics, hundreds of titles, and we're thinking we should reprint them since those comics lose money, and we make all our profits through merchandise and media." And she said, quote, "That's a really terrible idea." I said, "Oh, the chutzpah of youth. It's the ongoing exploits and new adventures of the characters that are the lifeblood of the company and make licensing and media possible. If you don't publish new stories, the characters will have a radioactive half-life, and eventually all the media and merchandise will disappear." Isn't it funny that somebody who just stepped into the position at 28 years old understood that in 1976? People today don't get it.
Yes, I would be curious, and this might just be me thinking too worldly, but like that's the European model for Tintin and Asterix, and they sell insane numbers in the millions every year. So I would be curious to know, like, if any like research had been done for that stuff over there. I can't imagine. But
if modern comic books and not learning anything from manga is, they're not looking elsewhere, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that is an interesting point. I highly doubt it. I think they were looking at the bottom line and saying, these books, we're getting our asses kicked by the new upstart. Like, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah.
And I think that was the climate at DC, was trying to solve the problem and stop the bleeding. And, Jenette, she grew up reading DC Comics. So to her, and not just DC Comics, she grew up reading a lot of other comics. Because, of course, we're talking about a time where there was a lot of stuff out there. And one of the things that I've been so fascinated by is the diverse publishing line that DC especially, but also even Marvel had. But we'll refer back to that. Jenette believed that comics could be better. She thought that DC had the potential to tell the best stories in comics. And she thought that they could do that with a higher quality of storytelling, better paper stock, longer stories in the actual floppies themselves, and etc. Now I'm going to read a quote from another magazine that Jenette spoke to, or rather, this was actually from the books themselves. This was the first time that comic book readers from DC heard directly from Jenette Kahn in December of '76, and so this is what she said. It's a funny, cute little message. When you've got just one comic and a lot of time to kill, what is the only thing you can do? Right, read the comic again. But supposing you've read it, not just twice, but 3 times, decided who wrote the jerkiest letter on the letters page, and spent at least 3 minutes wondering if those X-ray specs really work, and if so, why haven't you sent them away already? What then? Well, in desperation, you might turn again to the beginning and read the old familiar names in tiny type at the bottom of page 1. Sol Harrison, Jack Adler. Yep, it's the same old DC. But wait, wasn't Sol vice president before? It says president now. And Jack's vice president. And Joe Orlando's not just an editor. He's a managing editor. And Vince Coletta's art director. And Paul Levitz is some impressive sounding thing called editorial coordinator. Even a dingbat of modest intelligence can tell some kind of change is going on. A more astute dingbat might notice something else. One of the old familiar names is nowhere to be found. And there, in its place, is a new name, never before seen in comics, Jenette Kahn. All signs seem to indicate that an unknown person of presumably female persuasion has become publisher of DC. The inevitable questions arise. Who is she anyway? Does she have the necessary qualifications to be the publisher of the largest comic company in the world? Can she type? Yes, I can. 10 words a minute using 2 fingers. I also started 3 magazines, which, strange to say, you might well be hoarding right next to your most prized comics. I'm going to stop there because you can get an impression of who Jenette is with what I just read. Sassy, spunky, and ready to take on the world.
Kind of no bullshit. Realizes she's getting into a boys' club.
No,
and is curbing that shit at the door.
And she's ready.
Yeah.
Damn, that's
she's
crazy.
ready.
She came on with fucking boxing gloves.
Yep. Because she knew the climate and the environment that she would be jumping into. And Jenette is... Go ahead, Kill.
I was gonna say, was this lady still alive when Heather Antos went through the milkshake bullshit? Because
she's alive now.
Oh, I hope she gave Heather a call.
By the way, if you guys are enjoying this presentation so far, please do hit that like button if you're so inclined. Thank you, everybody that's joining. I see the chat between me referring to my script, so thank you all. Glad to see Dan and Atomic Hound here, especially because you guys are of the age where you've probably read some of this stuff, and you probably can speak to some of this stuff. So
outing them.
Well, I'd be proud, man. I really the more I dig into this old stuff, the more I wish that I had been around. And I think it's cool that there were people that that are still here that can speak to all this.
Yeah,
still here.
Comic book history is very fun, and there's a lot of good books about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So she quickly found an ally in Paul Levitz, a man who, of course, would go on to become president of DC and have a legendary career in his own right, but here was only 21 years old, if you can believe that. So we're talking about a very fresh-faced Paul Levitz.
Sean, do you mind if we just got a super chat from Joel? I just wanted to read it real quick.
Yes, please.
Joel said, I just wanted to say good morning. You guys are awesome. This is for the research that you had to do for the topic. So,
thank you so much, Joel. I really, really appreciate that. Good morning to you, and I hope that you enjoy this presentation. You guys make this possible, so I really appreciate that. That's so cool of you to do. So both of them saw the dire state of comics and were desperate to save the medium, swiftly making changes that immediately improved business and morale. One of those was the introduction of the Dollar Comics Initiative.
Almost feels like Walmart comics. You know what I mean? Like,
the parallels are literally everywhere.
Yeah,
they're all over the map. And I thought the Dollar Comics thing was so funny because, like, Now that would obviously be 99 cents, right? Like it would not be $1.
Sure, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be close.
Off the dollar cart.
We'd be lucky if we're getting a $2 comic.
But like,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be the round number. Like comics
Sure,
are
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
$5 or
Oh, yeah.
$4.99. You know,
It'd be $2.99 right now.
Yeah.
That's how
Drawing the
cheap you
line
get
at
it.
$0.99. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
the first $4 comics, so the first 4 comics that were $1 from DC were the Superman Family, House of Mystery, World's Finest, and GI Combat, as announced by Mike Tiefenbacher in the Comic Reader 136 from October 1976. Tiefenbacher was the executive editor of the Comic Reader at the time, a freelance writer and a comics historian.
Tom account says the first dollar comic he bought was World's Finest. So
There you go.
Whoa, that's awesome.
There you go. So this is what Tiefenbacher wrote. Beginning December, 4 titles, the Superman Family, House of Mystery, World's Finest, and GI Combat, will cost $1, will be 80-page giants. Before, right? Even that language. Before mathematicians start figuring out comparative costs with former 80-pagers, we will mention that these books will contain 66 pages of new material, roughly 4 times the material contained in a 30-cent book. What these books will resemble, for the most part, are Golden Age titles, i.e., they will return to multi-character books to the stands. So, Jenette Kahn hated reprints. She did not like the concept of reprints. She thought that reprints were bad. As I said earlier, she felt that the news stories were what people came to the table for, and that the reprints were just not worth doing. But
sense.
yeah, I mean, I completely agree. But she thought that the package that comics were presented in at the time just didn't work. So something had to change. This is the origin of the dollar comic. So this interview that I'm about to read from now is from Comic Media News number 29. And isn't it crazy how many different
yeah,
publications there are?
before
just
Wizard
about
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did have one question before we get into that.
Yeah.
Comics, normal comics, they were 30 cents. You said. So
These-
like in my
yeah.
head, $1 comics like, oh, that's cheap, but these are oversized, almost thrice the amount of a normal comic.
Yes.
Okay.
And
The Jokers of their time. Got it.
yes. And they don't have reprints in them, which they normally would have.
Gotcha. Okay.
Normally, you would have gotten a book like this, and it would have been half
All old stories.
Yeah, half old stories, half new, something like that.
Cool.
So this is the quote from Jenette. This is from January or February of 97, 97, Jesus. 20 years earlier, 77. Quote, the current package is absolutely untenable. 17 pages and reprints and a 30-cent cover price. There's no place to go, really. And yet, there was a time when you paid 10 cents for a comic book and 10 cents for a Time magazine. The trouble was that we didn't keep up with the rest of the industry in price rises. 20 years passed before we dared to make the great leap to 12 cents. Then we tried 15, then 20, then 25, and now 30 cents. But still, all that is too low. Time magazine is now $1. We should be $1. And that's where we're headed. It's a major experiment, but I think it's the answer, not just for us, but for Marvel, Archie, any comic book company. The dollar package is just like the Golden Age format in that we will be having 80 pages, 14 of ads, and 66 of all new material. It'll be a change for writers and artists to do stories of any length that seems appropriate to the story rather than cramming it into a meager 17 pages. It is going to give the wholesaler and retailer a chance to make money. The retailer, who for years has not wanted to carry comic books in his shop, saying, why should I? What does 50% off of 30% mean to anybody? All they do is clog up my newsstands and keep people from buying Playboy and all those other money-making magazines.
The audacity of hearing that versus hold the line at $3.99 or whatever.
$2.99, yeah.
And like we're paying $8 a pop now for 30 pages, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Unreal.
the experiment just never ended.
Unreal. And what I'm struck by is that this is such an incredibly raw and honest interview.
Yeah.
We would
Yeah.
never hear a Marvel or DC employee speak that way now. That just wouldn't happen. No way. And it's amazing how far behind the industry already is in 77. The whole industry, forget DC. 30 cents versus $1 for Time magazine, right? And this is at a time people don't necessarily like to admit this, but this is a major storyline that we're going to be dealing with. Is the fall of the newsstand and the rise of the direct market. The newsstand industry was already turning away from comics because of exactly what Jenette Kahn points out. They're not worth the shelf space. It's the exact same thing that Dan Didio said. You can't go to an airport, which will probably be in an interview quote later, and put a 30-cent comic on there when airports sell books and magazines and things that the airport shop owner is making real money off of. What money is there to make off a 35-cent comic? It ain't there.
I've seen comics in an airport twice in my life.
Never.
And they were
I
kids.
never have.
They were kids comics. They were Archie books. You know.
Right.
But that makes sense, right? You want to incentivize the retailer, and I think also you're offering a better product to an end consumer. It has more pages. It has something that like one of the big things we talk about is that value versus the page cost and whether it's even worth it. Like we struggle with that a lot of the time now, but at the very least that feels like value. I can sit there and read it, and and it takes time.
Yeah, exactly. Comics felt cheap.
Mm-hmm.
They were literally cheap
Yeah.
to buy. And parents would buy them for their kids, like, hey, have this while I shop, or have this while I, get a haircut, or whatever, whatever. They weren't treated seriously enough by
Disposable.
themselves. They were treated as disposable. The paper quality was god awful. It's a big reason why comics from even earlier than that are so sought after, because the paper quality was so bad that if you actually have a pristine copy of Superman, Action Comics, number one, if you have those early books in such great condition, that's rare because no one does. I decided to look at the sales charts as far back as I could go on Comic-Con, and it took me to 1984. The
84?
first, sorry,
1984. You said.
yeah, 1984. The first comic that I ever read, Secret Wars, was the #1 seller every month that year. But my heart sank when I did this because every issue of Secret Wars, except for the last one, which is issue 12, cost 75 cents. That's 7 years after DC was desperately trying to establish a dollar baseline. 7 years later, Marvel's big event, arguably the first legitimate crossover ever, was only 75 cents. That's awful. I'm going to shift over to an interview from Mike Gold, who at the time was DC's public relations representative. And he did an interview with Comic Media News number 32. This came out in August. This was the August-September edition from 77. The reason why the dollar comic books are doing so well and why we're so optimistic about them is that they're more profitable comics for the retailer to have, so that a guy who doesn't handle 35 cent or even 60-cent comics, a guy who was in an airport or a shopping center, these types of places by and large do not handle comic books because the 6 to 8 cents they make off a 35-cent comic book is not worth the hassle. But on $1, they're making good money. They're making more than on a $1 copy of Time magazine, as a matter of fact. DC was giving them 50 cents on the dollar, and Time was giving them 40 cents on the dollar.
Half? Holy shit.
The way we have it set up, the book will be on the stand for 2 months. That's the promise we make to these people. I don't think we'll change it until we have a full line of dollar books, rather than just the 3 we have scheduled at the moment. It's such a beautiful system we have now. There's no reason to jeopardize. So, Superman Family was an absolute juggernaut. This book slayed. It came out and it did gangbusters. But core fans of comics, I guess like the modern, that era's version of us, people who are well invested, that know the things, and are into it. The little bit of older crowd, the college age crowd, and up, they hated Superman Family. Because Superman Family harkened back to a bit of an older time when the stories were a little bit brighter. The cover had everybody smiling. Jenette Kahn was able to get Neil Adams to come back. Neil Adams had left. He was unhappy with the prior management, and he came back and was doing covers again. And so things were going great. And Superman Family was leading the charge. I'm going to read a quote again from Mike Gold. The first Superman Family dollar book. I know the fans didn't like it, and I'm not going to apologize for that. The younger readers really did like it. The book was probably the most profitable in terms of bucks. Comic book to be published in maybe 5 years by anybody. It sold phenomenally well, selling at about 140,000 copies per issue. That's a real rough estimate off the top of my head, but every point above break, even on a dollar book, is 3 times more profitable than a point on a 35-cent book. And the book came in at about 12 points above break even. That's phenomenal. That's terrific. Here's why. Superman Family sold 140,000 copies per issue in 1977. In 2019, that's the last year during which comic sales figures were released publicly, no ongoing book has sold 100,000 copies or better every month. The one event series that did that was House and Powers of X, which double shipped in September and August, each issue selling over 100K.
Whoa.
Not even Batman. Not even Batman. That's the entire year of 2019.
Wait, the entirety, not a single issue of any of them had sold over that 100K?
Every month.
Within their respective month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like every time it came out, it sold 100K.
Sure. Okay.
That's absurd.
It's the numbers, baby. They're scary. They don't look good. They haven't for a while.
But what's so funny to me is that the best-selling book that DC had that was selling so much was something that fans didn't like. Core audiences didn't like.
Or older fans didn't like.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's worth pointing out. And so,
and sorry,
go ahead.
To sort of go off of that, it's the same thing we're having, the same issue we're having with like Captain Underpants or Dogman or whatever the fuck. Like older fans aren't going to go for that, but you sure as shit put that in front of a kid and they're going to eat it up.
And to that point, and I'm gonna post this into Discord. I was walking the city yesterday, and I found the theater where they're premiering the Cat Kid, which is a Dave Pilkey creation that is adapted for theater. I'm gonna put it in the general chat for anybody who's interested.
It's pretty cool. So at this time, Marvel is doing great. Marvel was appealing to older people, college age people, the more entrenched comic book fan. But they were also appealing to something else. They were appealing to the direct market. The direct market was founded in the 1970s by Phil Seuling. It was initially created by him to allow retailers to bypass distributors and make purchases directly from publishers. So if you don't know what the direct market is, this is the time to lean in. Its success is predicated on the concept of no returnability. Stores that purchase comics do so without the ability to return them if they don't sell, removing the burden of returned comics from the publishers. Traditional comics carriers like newsstands operated on a sell or return system, often causing comics publishers to lose money and be stuck with comics they have no means of selling. That's what we talked about before with DC sell-through rate of 50% to Marvel's 70%. So even when returnability was a thing amongst the non-direct market retailers of comics, Marvel was kicking their ass. But when you get into the direct market, sorry?
More use of red.
Yeah, it was certainly the red. And Star Wars, it's worth pointing out, as Atomic Hound did in the chat, Star Wars comics were also awesome. The direct market allows for more risk on the part of publishers and allowed for the formation of new publishers at the time because comic shops are directly targeting their audience, and comics have virtually no competition within that space, while on newsstands they were competing with magazines. The direct market also made the culture of collecting back issues, thus allowing people to get caught up on series they would otherwise never be able to, possible. And it was created in response to the declining interest in comics at the newsstands.
Was it successful? Then it was successful in revitalizing that, yeah. Because if you're gonna have a consolidated space for the thing that you want, both on a from like a consumer and producer end. Oh, but then you box yourself. Interesting. Okay, wait, keep going.
No, what you're doing is what happened. That's history, dude. That's the history of comics. And spoilers, but we will definitely do one of these on the direct market because I'm fascinated by it.
Yo, yeah.
But saying it plainly now, the direct market, in my opinion, saved comic books. Did it doom it later? We'll talk about it.
Yeah. I feel like we're in the same situation now, except not it's direct market and digital. But
ooh,
dang! Look at these analogs.
Ooh. So Marvel was playing more to the direct market. Marvel understood that this was a place where their audience already was. Why bother playing the newsstand game when you could play the direct market game? They were flooding the market, publishing a ton of books, and they were publishing books that they felt would hit their exact core audience. And in fact, jumping ahead to 81, Marvel had actually tried, I believe this was the first example of this, at least from the big two, to play directly to the direct market by publishing a Dazzler comic, which would not have succeeded on the newsstand because Dazzler. Go ahead, Tyler.
This is the one I think that also came with a record or some kind of music with it. I have it.
You have it?
I have the Dazzler comic somewhere. I have multiple Dazzler books. Little known fact.
Oh, wow.
Big Dazzler fan. I have 4 Dazzler action figures too. I love Dazzler.
Is this similar to like Daphne Byrne being the book that saves comics? Like
that was a joke. So this is the truth of it.
Okay.
Jim Shooter tried with this Dazzler book by making it the first ongoing series exclusive to the direct market, and meaning that it only sold to comic shops. and it did crazy good. 400,000 copies sold to stores. That was double the best-selling books that they had at the time. So that's just to give you an idea of what Marvel was doing at the time. DC was still years behind of finding that kind of success in the direct market.
Yeah, it looks like this was originally supposed to be published in like a super special series, but then they flopped. Yeah, I do have this. Yeah, it was
That's
after
cool.
her first appearance in Uncanny. I think she fights Galactus in this series. Yeah,
Sounds like some Squirrel Girl shit.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's shift back to DC because DC is winning, not the war. They're losing the war, but they're getting better. Things are getting better. Dollar comics are really working. And so let's take a look at DC's publishing line. I was fascinated by this. So I'm looking at an image that features what DC's publishing line looked like in early 97 as we transition out of 96.
77.
So Jesus Christ. 77, thank you.
True 90s kid.
It's a long list. If you guys will indulge me, I'm going to go through it all because I think it's important.
Yes.
Action Comics, which featured Superman, backups called The Private Life of Clark Kent and The Sporting Life of Steve Lombard. I don't even know who Steve Lombard is.
What?
That feels like current action with the backups on it, and one of them is a younger Clark Kent with young Jonathan. Yeah.
Oh, true.
If I'm not mistaken, Steve Lombard, and Hound and Dan will correct me in the chat. I know Steve Lombard was a rival, I think, for Lois Lane.
Yeah.
And he was like a co-anchor of the Daily Planet's news stuff. So he would have been the Gary Oak to Clark Kent's Ash Ketchum.
That's hilarious.
Oh, he was
great backup character.
sportscaster to bounce off of Clark Kent's news reporter.
Wasn't he kind of a dick? Am I remembering that correctly?
If he's Gary Oak, then
yeah, true. Yep.
Yeah.
Adventure Comics, which starred Aquaman with Manhunter from Mars as backup feature.
Ooh.
All-Star Comics starring the Justice Society of America. Batman Family, which was a 50-cent giant starring Robin, Batgirl, and Man-Bat. Batman Family was a crazy success as well.
Man-Bat?
Yeah, Man-Bat. I don't know if it's that Man-Bat, though. I'm assuming it is, but I just wouldn't have the context. Black Lightning, The Brave and the Bold, with Batman team-ups with assorted DC heroes. DC Special, which was a 50-cent anthology title that had various people in it. DC Superstars, which was a similar concept, but it was a genre anthology, not a superhero anthology. Detective Comics, of course, which was a Batman book. The Flash, Freedom Fighters, Ghosts, Supernatural short stories. GI Combat, which was the dollar book we talked about. Green Lantern, starring the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and Black Canary. Okay. Hercules Unbound, House of Mystery, which was the dollar book we discussed. House of Secrets, which was a supernatural short stories anthology. Isis, Jonah Hex, Justice League, Kamandi, The Last Boy on Earth, Karate Kid, Metal Men, New Gods, Our Fighting Forces, starring with backup features starring individual squad members. Plastic Man, Rag Man, Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter, Secret Society of Supervillains, Secrets of the Haunted House, Sergeant Rock, Shade the Changing Man, Shazam, Starfire, Superboy, starring the Legion of Superheroes, Super Friends, Superman, Superman Family, which again was that heavy hitter, which had Supergirl, Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, Crypto, Nightwing, and Flamebird in it.
Damn.
But that's not the Nightwing.
No,
that's
those
not
are the
Dick Grayson.
Kryptonian superheroes. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Superman or Super Team Family, which was a 50-cent giant that featured the Challengers of the Unknown and the Doom Patrol reprints. Teen Titans, Unexpected, which was supernatural stories, Unknown Soldier, Warlord, Weird War Tales, Weird Western Tales, Welcome Back, Cotter, which was one of laughing at that, which
That's
was one
great.
of several DC TV books, which was an initiative that Jenette Kahn tried before Dollar Comics that actually failed.
What artist was drawing John Travolta in that?
Yeah, they started with Welcome Back, Cotter. I can't imagine why that failed.
But yeah,
Huge show though.
Sure.
burned out, but yeah. Witching Hour, which was supernatural short stories, Wonder Woman, World's Finest Comics, which was the dollar book that featured Superman, Batman, Green Arrow, Black Canary, the Vigilante, and Wonder Woman, and Young Love.
Comics, I wish I was alive in the 70s. That's incredible.
Honestly,
From Ragman ongoing, fuck.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
Warlord
They had
ongoing.
Shade over there earlier.
Yeah. The
Just quickly, the Green Lantern book you mentioned that was co-starred Green Arrow, Black Canary, that would have been the Hard Traveling Heroes
yep.
arc,
Oh,
which is where the drug issue happens with Speedy, but is a seminal it's Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil.
well, goddamn, Kale, I'm glad you're here, dude.
As you're saying all this, I'm actually really surprised at how much I already know.
Dude, a lot of these books were good in in retrospect. We can look back at these and like, oh, these are like seminal runs for a lot of these things.
Comic Boom says, I have high grade Superman family comics, hard to find in 9.8. That is so cool.
What?
Hell yeah.
If you would be so kind as to take a picture, if you have like physical access, and send it our way, I would love that. I would love that. That's really cool. Now, if you zoned out as I was listing all those books, or you felt you needed to skip ahead, that's okay. I understand. I have the breakdown for you. So 4 of the titles explicitly included the word war. 8 of the books are about war or soldiers that don't include the word war in their title. 8 of the books are supernatural or horror books. One of them is a supernatural war crossover book. There's 2 karate books, like martial art books, and 24 superhero comics. So a much more diverse line. And you even had Young Love, which, was, to my knowledge, a very popular book.
Probably would have been the dying embers of romance in mainstream comics anyway.
And the interesting thing is that, you can see this just if you look at the list of books that I said. DC has said, okay, well, maybe romance books as like a genre unto itself is going the way of the dodo, but we can infuse romance into our superhero books.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
I wonder if that's where you get like the long-haired Clark Kent, Fabio covers, hair blowing in the wind with his cape, and the Lois with her blouse open, draped over him.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the draws, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but one of the draws was, again, the fact that they had those incredible covers. You had covers from Ramita at the time, and Neil Adams, I believe. He brought a lot of people's interest to these books. So yeah, incredibly diverse publishing line, and it would get more diverse because, emboldened by the success of the Dollar Comics initiative, Jenette Kahn and her team decided to gamble again, this time with a line-wide change that would see the page count and price of their non-Dollar Comics rise. DC also had an ace in the hole by the name of Superman the movie.
Ooh, hello.
Slated for release in June of 1978, it would launch right in time for Superman's 50th anniversary and reinvigorate people's love for comics, saving DC.
Wow.
What,
What a
Jenette?
what a nice ending to this story.
Yeah,
All
that's
right, let's
crazy.
get on with the news.
Yeah, that was awesome. Sean, I thank you for taking us on this journey. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. What Jenette, Paul Levitz, and the rest didn't know is that not even Superman could save them from their fate, which was well sealed by June of 78, because winter was coming. A bitter, brutal winter that brought the blizzard of 77.
Oh no.
And that is where we will end the first part of the history of the DC Comics Implosion.
But then you gotta make it a little dramatic, and then the camera pans out, and who is there standing amidst the snow? Mr.
Stanley.
Freeze. Oh,
Oh.
No.
So we'll do this every week until we're done. Probably about 3 more weeks of this.
This would have been. Now I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to relate to Marco here and get into Marco's mindset. This initiative would have been where Swamp Thing first appeared, right?
no.
No.
Swamp Thing's from the 40s, isn't he?
No, 72. 71.
So House of. Okay. So not this House of Secrets. Okay.
Yeah. House of Secret 92?
I did find my first Dazzler though. So
Oh, that's so cool.
Yo.
Oh yeah.
great cover.
Yeah, I have the one where Magneto's like cuffed. One of the early trials.
Hucked.
Cuffed.
I bet.
Hell.
So where are you guys at? How did you feel about that? Are you on the hook? What are you thinking?
Yeah, this rules.
What I feel about this is that like once you listed all the titles, like I miss those genre books. You know.
Yeah.
Like even on the cover I have for the DC Explosion, I have the image up. Like it's Superman, it's Black Canary, it's Wonder Woman, it's Batman. But then behind him is Jonah Hex, I think Cain or Abel from the House books,
Both of them
and
were-
Sergeant Rock.
what-
Like
Yeah.
they're on the same tier as Superman and Batman, which is bonkers to me. Because you're lucky
Well-
to get a cameo from these guys in any book.
House of Secrets and House of Mystery were both like pretty well known,
Yeah.
like and popular horror anthology titles. And yeah, you got a lot of characters come out of that. So like
But you just-
that.
The Big
to
Two
your
just doesn't
point-
do that anymore, you know. Like
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
we have to
have
get
that
our silver
anthology.
coins, our swan songs, you know.
And those have been doing really well, which is interesting as to like why, some publishers haven't gotten or aren't taking that opportunity to be like, oh, this is something that's working. Like the DC horror line initiative they did like a year or two that they started, like that's been really successful. I think the books have all been quality. Whether or not they continue, that I think you need to focus your things. It becomes very genre specific, which feels reminiscent to the way that manga segments their stuff now. Like,
Yeah.
you're
I just feel
doing it
that
by
the genre
category.
stuff is less farmable.
But it's
So-
categorical.
Sure.
It can become that, I think.
Dan Trudeau has the answer. As typical, he is Dan the true Trudeau.
It's the
As
truth,
always.
man.
Those books sold on the newsstand, but not the direct market. And that's the problem. So, as the direct market became more vital, they were able to target their core audience more, and their core audience wanted more superhero comics. So they stopped diversifying and they cut the line more and more. And you're going to hear why. The explosion implosion is a major reason why. When I tell you what DC's publishing line was like in 78 versus 77, you'll understand.
So curious.
This is a pivotal time. I'm surprised people don't talk about this more. This is an incredibly exciting time in comics, and it really shaped the next decade and, frankly, the decades to come. This is where it all started. I mean, I'm sure it didn't. Eventually, I'll look at the 60s, and I'll say the same shit, right? But this is, a lot of the stuff that we think about and talk about today was happening then.
And Sean, you and I are Marvel heads. I think
Yeah.
proclaimed.
Mark.
So this is news to me. Like I mean I've known about it tangentially just from like my knowledge of Marvel. This kind of going on in the background, but like, yeah, this is fun stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So we'll be back with that next week. We're not done. The show's not done, but we will do the next
Casey, bye.
presentation. It is time for the history of the DC Comics Implosion Part 2. Now, last week, we talked a lot. Last week, we talked about the rise of Jenette Kahn to the role of publisher and her quest to make DC the premier comics publisher, the launch of the incredibly successful DC Dollar Comics Initiative, and the impetus behind the DC Explosion. The DC Explosion was a strategy on the part of DC to combat Marvel's rise and to beat them at their own game, which, amongst other things, DC thought was publishing a ton of books. So DC thought they would flood the market it as an explosion, and they would take the reins back from Marvel as the kings of comics, if you will. Now, up on the screen, if you're watching us live or otherwise, I have an image of the way that DC promoted the explosion. This was the first ad that appeared in DC Comics that referenced the explosion explicitly. I like that, Sylph. Thank you for saying that. A palate cleanser. Thank you. And on this ad, it says, beginning June 1st, the DC Explosion. More pages, more stories, and the most exciting superheroes in comics. Watch for full details next month. Now, on this cover, I can say that I recognize 5 of the characters.
Deadman.
That all?
For me,
Manhunter,
yeah. For me.
Birdman.
Did you say Birdman?
I mean, Hawkman. I was thinking Harvey Birdman.
Birdman.
Attorney at law. I think there's one character on here I can't, maybe 2, that I can't name because and one that I'm not 100% sure of.
So this is almost a 50-year-old image,
Damn.
right?
God damn.
And all of these characters presumably have had many, many, many more appearances now than they had at the time. My question to you guys, right out the gate, because we know that the explosion, things didn't go so well. Is this the way to promote your explosion with characters that nobody knows?
The time, though, people would have known these characters.
Right.
But they're not Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, or any of those people.
I don't think you needed them necessarily to carry the same significance that you would now.
Really? You sure about that?
I think so.
Are you sure that Superman Family wasn't selling 140-something thousand copies? That Batman
No.
Family wasn't? Those were the biggest characters 50 years ago.
For sure, but these are also recognizable enough that you can sell an explosion.
Is it?
You can sell these as like side characters.
Can you?
Go, hey, Marco, go ahead and keep walking into his trap.
I know.
Look out for that pile of leaves on the ground. Surely there won't be a net in it.
The first time I saw this image, which was months ago now, I had the exact same thought. I don't know these people. I would not be excited if today you told me that there was going to be an explosion and it included these characters. I would say I don't give a damn. And I'm not saying that there was no one who cared back then, but I don't think that it would. I think, Marco, if you were in charge of DC, well, you're iffy, but most people would say, hey, show them the people that they love and show them the characters that they don't know yet. That way they anticipate a mix. That seems to make sense. DC decided, let's show them all these jobbers. Let's show them the B list and some of the C list. Not the best idea. DC. But that's okay. Not all of the titles that would be encompassed in the DC Explosion started in 1978. This is something that I think a lot of people don't know about the DC Explosion. And I'm excited about this because I feel like there are a lot of people listening right now who know about the DC Explosion and the Implosion, but don't know about the things that I'm going to say. This is the part to lean in on. The DC Explosion actually started in 1977 because I have a timeline. Here it is.
I have a timeline, and it starts in 1977.
Actually, Kale, my timeline starts in 1976.
I know, I was here last week.
So in March of 76, DC raised their prices from 25 to 30 cents with a page count of 36.
Wow.
In June of 77, they raised the price again of a standard comic from 30 to 35 cents. March of 77, we got the very first DC Dollar Comics, which we talked about. In April, we got the next batch that we talked about. In August of 77, DC brought back Aquaman after 6 years with no title. Can you imagine that? Actually, I can. I don't know when the last Aquaman title was prior to the Johns revitalization. But they brought Aquaman back, canceled Superboy, DC Special, and Hercules Unbound. They brought back Mr. Miracle after 3 years hiatus in September, canceled Starfire in October, Richard Dragon Kung Fu Fighter in November, Isis in December. They canceled those titles to make way for the big boom. Here, let me see if I have it. I have it, yeah. Here is a list of the DC lineup of titles in June, July, and August of 1978. What is labeled as the DC Explosion? That is up on the screen now. This is a crazy list of books. By my count, it's 52.
Hey.
I don't know if that's, there has to be some deliberate. Maybe it wasn't deliberate at the time, but it became deliberate afterwards. Unfortunately, that's not something that I know. If you're not watching, and you want to know what these titles are, I'm gonna read them. So it's an unbelievable list. Action Comics, Adventure Comics, All-Star Comics, Army at War, Batman, Batman Family, Battle Classics, Black Lightning, Brave and the Bold, DC Comics Presents, DC Special Series, Detective Comics, Doorway to Nightmare, Dynamic Classics, Firestorm, The Flash, Ghosts, Green Lantern, House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Jonah Hex, Justice League of America, Commandi, Men of War, Our Fighting Forces, Secrets of the Haunted House, Sergeant Rock, Showcase, Star Hunters, Steel, The Indestructible Man, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, Super Friends, Superman, Superman Family, Unexpected, Unknown Soldier, War World, Weird World Tales, Western Weird Tales, Witching Hour, Wonder Woman, World's Finest. Then, the unpublished books. These were books that were featured. If you look at the list, if you look at the DC Explosion ad, you'll notice that some of the characters that I mentioned are on this. Aquaman. And remember I said unpublished. Aquaman. Claw the Unconquered. Demand Classics. Mr. Miracle with Big Barda.
Ooh.
New Gods. The Secret Society of Supervillains. Shade the Changing Man. The Vixen, and Western Classics.
Huh.
That is an insane list of books.
A lot of genre titles.
Yes.
A lot.
A lot. A lot. This is years after the Vietnam War, by the way. They're still publishing constant war comics.
Yeah, they had the war, the GI, but I mean, even like the what was it? The Western and the wacky Western and all that stuff.
Yep.
We don't got that now.
No. like we said last week, like they baked genre into the superhero, so it became superhero plus.
Right.
And it's worth pointing out that like the New 52 tried to reintroduce the genre books to some degree, and that I don't know how well that worked.
It was All-Star Western.
I think you had that, and then I want to say there was some kind of Sergeant Rock or something like that. Maybe I'm bugging.
Yeah, there's a Jonah Hex one.
Jonah Hex. Right. Yep. Absolutely. So a laundry list of titles. Remember what I said last time? When we ended our presentation, it was 77, and there was a bad winter. Really bad winter. Keep that in your mind as we move forward. Really, really, really bad winter. So June comes and goes. We get the explosion of books. This was the lead story of Newswatch in the Comics Journal number 41, August 1978. In an unprecedented move that has caused waves of shock and consternation to ripple throughout the comics industry, DC Comics has initiated a massive cutback of their titles, canceling 17 titles and postponing indefinitely 4 new titles that were already scheduled for publication. In addition to this, DC has laid off 5 full-time staffers and has changed its 50-cent 25-page story format to a 40-cent 17-page format. DC has canceled Army at War, All-Star Comics, Batman Family, Battle Classics, Black Lightning, Claw, Doorway to Nightmare, Dynamic Classics, Firestorm, House of Secrets, Commandi, Our Fighting Forces, Secrets of the Haunted House, Showcase, Star Hunter, Steel, The Witching Hour, Demand Classics, Deserter, Vixen, and Western Classics.
All in one breath.
All in one breath. They got rid of all of it.
Damn.
And do you want to hear the secret that most people don't know? Those books were canceled before sales ever came out.
Oh, shit. We can't produce it. Sorry, bye. Wow.
Sales never even came out.
So what did you have running? Like Batman, Superman? Is that it?
You mean what was left?
Yeah.
I'll show you what was left in a little bit. DC had to cut so much of their line. And it's because, well, it's attributed to one of the worst blizzards in North American history. The blizzard of 77. Now, I researched this blizzard because I was like, there's no, come on, you're blaming the weather. This is silly. This is silly. So I looked into it. One of the worst nor'easters in North American history. Dozens of people died. Millions spent on relief, damage control, and getting supplies to the eastern U.S. Traffic frozen, so people had to leave their cars wherever they were.
What?
It devastated the package delivery services, making it nearly impossible for retailers to receive their comics on time. By the time many comic books hit racks, they were older and went unsold, which, because of the returnability policy at the time that we talked about last week, meant that DC would eat those costs. Remember what I said. This is proto-direct market. DC was relying on everything else. That's newsstands, that's, grocery stores, that's all the rest of it. Those places did not receive their books. They couldn't. By the time that they did, people didn't want them anymore. And so guess what happened? Those books went back. And DC did not reap the benefits of having sold them. Devastated. This Blizzard was so bad, it spawned music, 2 books, and a board game.
Music by who?
No one that I know.
Just a band writing about getting stuck for like 3 days under snow. It's like, I was in my car.
I just thought it sounded cool that was the case. It's true, but I included it because I thought it was interesting.
It's funny.
Mike Gold, who was then DC Comics Publications representative, said in a July 1978 interview from Media Scene number 31, "It all starts with our yearly budget review meeting, which is held 6 months after our annual budget meeting. One gives you the money, and the other checks to see how you're spending it. In 6 months, anything can happen, and this time it did. What we saw in May was a result of this winter's blizzard, and things just sort of rolled along from there, out of DC's control. To be honest, however, what happened was not solely responsible to these figures, but more due to the patterns which have been developing over the past several years." Why did the implosion happen? What caused the sales at DC to dip so badly? Last time we talked, everything was on the up. Well, that's because comics work so far in advance. Last time we talked, everything was on the up, but they hadn't yet received the financial, check-in from everything that was going on. The newsstand was already looking to get out of the business of comics. They didn't want to sell comics anymore. Not at the rate they had been, because they weren't making any money. This was a cascading effect that started way before 77 and then finally started to be felt by DC Comics in 78. Things were bad. But what about the Savior? What about Superman the movie? I told you it'd be out in June, and it would save
right.
DC Comics. Here's a picture that I have on the screen if you're watching of Jenette Kahn, Sol Harrison, who was the president at DC, and Christopher Reeves looking over. I think it was fan entries or something like that, or it was something like that. But they're together preparing for this this great this great movie that's about to come out and save DC. Well, any historians in the chat, any historians that are listening to me now, people with decent memory, will know that Superman the movie did not come out in June of 1978.
What?
It didn't. The movie got delayed.
Oh no.
The movie was delayed because of problems in production behind the scenes. They were filming 2 movies at once. They were filming Superman 1 and 2 at the same time. Off the strength of the fact that Superman was so popular and they had such high hopes and faith in this movie that it would do well. So well that they need a sequel. And Richard Donner, he was fed up. He wasn't happy with how things were going. He was pretty frustrated. And so they kind of put things on pause. The movie got delayed. And it would still release in 1978, but way too late for the plans that DC had to coincide with the release of the movie. What was supposed to be the tie-in was called Superman World of Krypton. That story was supposed to be baked into Showcase, which was a series that DC had at the time. Because it was so late, they pulled that story from there and they released it as a limited series down the line, which was called World of Krypton. That is the first limited series ever.
Whoa. That's cool.
Yeah. So we got a little bit of history due to the delay of this film. Now, a lot of people lost their jobs. A tremendous amount of people lost their jobs.
Yikes.
So, March of 78, I do want to include this because it's pretty cool. March of 78 saw the release of Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' Superman versus Muhammad Ali comic, which existed because of Jenette Kahn's reestablished relationship with Neil Adams. They were DC and Neil were on the outs at the time.
Oh, she brought him back in?
She brought him back into the fold, and this was a direct result of that.
Wow. Okay.
By August, DC had to cancel 4 titles. The Aquaman that I talked about, Mr. Miracle, Claw, and Shade. In September, they canceled 8 more. Not only that, but they cut the price down to 40 cents and the page count to 17. In October, they canceled another 6. And that's how DC closed out the year of 1978. On their ass. Having laid off all their freelancers. One guy who was writing Green Lantern kept his job. In terms of freelancers. And you know what happened? It sent everybody over to the Marvel side of things. Which I think is fascinating history in and of itself. The people that got fired then turned over to Marvel. People like Larry Hama, sorry. Al Milgrom. So many people. Who knows what they could have done had they stayed at DC.
Yeah.
Marco, you wanted the list of DC's books at the end.
Yeah.
So in 1979, the image won't work for some reason. But in 1979, post the DC implosion, all you had was Action Comics, Adventure Comics, Batman, Brave and the Bold, DC Comics Presents, Detective Comics, Flash, G.I. Combat, Ghosts, Green Lantern, House of Mystery, Jonah Hex, Justice League of America, Men of War, Sergeant Rock, Super Friends, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, Superman, Superman Family, Unexpected, Unknown, Warlord, Weird World Tales, Wonder Woman, and World's Finest Comics. That's it.
Damn. So half, almost more than half the
half.
publication line. Yeah.
Gone. Think about all the creators that represents.
Yeah. It's out the door.
So, what happens next? What happens after this explosion completely backfires and becomes an implosion? What happens to all these creators that got fired? What happens to the work that was already produced? And why did the implosion happen? Well, that's what we'll talk about next week. On part 3 of the history of the DC Comics implosion. To me, it's fascinating. Go ahead, Marco.
It's an interesting experiment in comics, and I think one that was thought through, but the circumstances around it caused it to fail. And that's the curious part, is I think there was strategy and idea and innovation here, but the cards didn't pan out like that.
Yeah, it sounds like sort of the lessons that were learned was that it's better to hedge your bets.
Yeah. Versus the initial, this was the opportunity. It came at a cost, and we lost this round, but that does not mean we stagnate, right? We need the next explosion. But to your point, it was, an explosion will fail.
It's a combination of things that we'll definitely get more into next week. I think DC chasing Marvel probably led them into a pitfall that they didn't see coming. Amongst a lot of other things.
Historically on brand.
Right.
Well, looking back.
Right. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you for the kind words. If you enjoyed this, we appreciate knowing that. You guys already know all the ways you can support us. Thank you for those that do. Thank you for those that are expressing their enjoyment. We've got I wanted to do 4, but we might do 3. I'll figure it out this week and let you guys know how we're gonna close out. But yeah, we've got more in the tank to talk about as it relates to this. And if there are other subjects that you want us to talk into and dive into, let us know. We have reached the point in the show where it is time for the history of the DC Comics Implosion Part 3.
Whoa.
Which,
Already?
yeah, I know, we've been having so much fun. Which I do
still
have to
like that.
announce, this is the last part. This will be the finale.
Oh,
Yeah. So, we skipped it last week, unfortunately, due to time constraints on our end. But if you guys will recall, in part 2, we discussed the implosion itself, why it happened, how it happened, what caused it. We discussed how a blizzard, a really bad blizzard, the Superman film not dropping when it was supposed to. It was supposed to come out in June. It came out months and months later. How lagging sales from DC's books before the explosion, which was a publishing initiative on the part of Jenette Kahn to shore up sales and breathe new life into DC's books and to combat Marvel. Sales before the explosion were bad, and so the explosion really never really got off, and that's why it was more like an implosion. It was a whimper. It was a wet fart. And they cut their line. They slashed their line. They cut the price of comics. They did a lot of damage, I guess, damage control. And so I want to refer to Paul Levitz, who did an interview with 13th Dimension in 2015. Paul Levitz was at the time a DC Comics editorial coordinator. He said, quote, I'm sorry, actually, this quote that I'm about to read is from the Bronze and Modern Comics podcast, which is a YouTube channel that you guys should check out. It's really good. Quote, not senior enough that anyone in the distribution and corporate management side would listen to a 21-year-old saying your estimates are wrong. I mean, it sucks, but it's not as bad as your estimators are making it out to be. Now, what he's talking about is the fact that when the numbers came in for the prior 6 months and they were bad, they were sat down and told, okay, it's time, we got to do something drastic. And he's saying the numbers were wrong. It wasn't correct. They were judging numbers based on things that DC had no control over, like the aforementioned blizzard. He also said it was bad business. Well, this is in regards to why things might not have worked. Quote, it was bad business in the sense that when you have brand loyalty, making any shift like that visibly and that radically has a price tag you're going to pay for a long time. Was it an overcorrection to trim the line down to a shorter line? Probably not. The newsstand business was fading. It was going to continue to fade. The comic shop business was still very small, and DC was not producing very much material that was very good for it by comparison to Marvel. So if you did a trend line from 1978 based on continuing to do business the same way, the most probable, I mean, it looked really, really bad. People did the best they could. We just talked earlier in the show about the idea of a solution to the problem being a return to grocery stores and things of that nature. And here's Paul Levitz, granted in 1978, discussing how that business model was going the way of the dodo, and that it was going to happen independent of any actions on the part of publishers. So, in my opinion, and this is something I fully intend to talk about more down the road, but in my opinion, the direct market saved comics. Why? Because people were already not buying them. People were already not carrying them. And at that time, it was full returnability, which means that if you hit a grocery store, right, with a bunch of Superman comics and 30% of them sold to individual people that bought it from the grocery store, that grocery store at the end of the month is going to send every single one of those unsold copies back to DC, and DC will have to give them their money back. That's brutal. Imagine if that was the same, if we still had that system today.
Yikes. Yo, dude. That hit hard on shops.
That's the only way it would work. To grocery stores and all those other retailers would never accept comics into their stores without returnability.
Someone pointed something to that effect out earlier in the week, and I don't recall what the conversation was or what the context was, but the effect was basically that comic books aren't profitable even for retailers. So why would a giant mega corporation make space for a physical item that won't sell, won't bring them profit, are hard to find, and hard to keep track of?
We saw it with the Walmart initiative.
Yeah.
Dan Didio tried his best. We saw what happened. It wasn't worth the space, and that was a $7 item, I believe. Those Walmart books that they had, and it had.
And the other problem.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The other problem with that Walmart thing is like the DC had no presented in individual stores. They would tell you it would be it would be on this the book section or whatever. I found it once.
Yeah, same.
In all the Walmarts I went to. They were just a mess, and most of them were just people because it was an affordable price, so people would buy them and then resell them.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not everyone has access to Walmart. For example, I've never seen one of those. I don't have.
They're not in the city.
If I wanted to get that, I would have to buy it from a reseller for probably at the bare minimum double the price. I'm not gonna do that for what a Brian Michael Bendis Batman story. I'm good.
Yeah,
That was the best thing he did in DC, honestly.
I'm sure it was. Not paying $20 for it. So it's a tough thing, and the industry was already suffering from this at that point. And so the pivot to the direct market, this is a big reason why Marvel was doing so well, because they had the foresight to say, wait, we can kill in the direct market. We can make books tailored directly to our audience. DC was slow on that. DC was trying to make their money through the newsstand, who was saying, yeah, we're done with this. I don't care if it's $1. I don't care what it is. We're not doing this. So a whole bunch of DC's books were cut. They culled the line. I showed last week how different the line was after the DC Comics implosion. What the line looked like in 79 was radically different than what it looked like in 78, and it's a shame. The biggest book that was technically kind of sort of canceled, but not really, is Detective Comics. Detective Comics was nearly canceled in favor of Batman Family, the dollar comic that sold very well, even in the midst of the implosion. Batman Family was then renamed Detective Comics starring the Batman Family. Now, I have an image up on the screen if you guys are watching us on YouTube, and that is what the cover looked like. If you had to guess, based on only that cover, what is this book called?
Batman Family.
It says Batman Family in big-ass letters, and Detective Comics kind of smaller and in the little bit behind it. So clearly the Batman Family branding was something that people associated with quality, whereas Detective Comics just wasn't selling. But DC staffers who remained after the implosion advocated and went to bat for the retention of Detective Comics. So this is what Paul Levitt said about that time. Quote, there was about a day or two in there when we were talking about canceling Detective. I think actually it was Mike Gold who was very passionately rose to its defense, pointing out that that's what the company was named after, and we couldn't do that. So the book would have pretty much been the same book either way, but certainly it was a better thing historically to keep the detective name alive. We owe a debt to Mike for that. Imagine if they had just there just wasn't a Detective Comics.
That's kind of crazy. Like that's like there's not an Action Comics on the stand, you know?
Right. So,
Has there been a
Go ahead.
point since where Detective Comics hasn't been on the stands? No, right?
not to
Been
my
pretty much
knowledge.
consistent.
Not for very long, if ever. I mean,
As far back as I can remember reading DC, Detective Comics was like telling side stories to what Grant was doing in Batman at the time, and then you had like the Batman Eternal idea, I believe, that started in Detective Comics. They had like their own version of that, and then it spun out to its own thing. Paul Dini also had a great run at the time, so that's that. But that's only what I know of.
According to at least Wikipedia, the original numbering was up until 2011, and then the New 52 relaunched it. But 2016, it came back to that original numbering. So presumably, it hasn't not been in publication.
Okay. Okay. So what happened after the implosion? In the immediate aftermath of the implosion, DC dramatically cut their line of books and even more dramatically slashed their staff. The day the axe came down, DC staff was forced to tell freelancers that their time with DC was up. Mike Barr said this in back issue number 2 from February 2004. When the implosion fell, I and other DC staffers were given a list of freelancers whose assignments had just been canceled, with orders to tell them to stop work immediately. Even I knew that was nothing more than a signal to a freelancer to pull an all-nighter to finish the assignment before delivery. Amazing how many freelancers I contacted had finished the jobs they were working on just before I told them to quit. I hadn't known things were that bad. So what happened to all the Explosion books that were done, that were ready to be shipped out and printed? This was a lot of work that was completed. A ton of books were done and ready to ship that just never came out. What happened? Well, turns out they were released, but not to the masses, in something called the Canceled Comics Cavalcade. I've been dying to talk about this.
CCC.
Yes. As a means of establishing copyright on the material, the remaining staff at DC decided to collect it all and publish it as the Canceled Comic Cavalcade. Paul Kupperberg, who was then DC Comics public relations assistant, did an interview in 2007, and he said the following. I did the grunt work on the CCC, assembling all the material from various editors, arranging it all, and dealing directly with the printing. The printing and binding itself was done in the Warner Brothers print shop, which was in the basement of 75 Rockefeller Center, where DC then had its officers, by a gentleman named Neil. The CCC was composed of Xerox copies between heavy blue paper covers, glued square spine held together by a strip of black binding tape. We went crazy and commissioned covers from Alex Suviak and Al Milgram. Everybody gets hit by a truck, but they probably worked for free to be in on the joke or to get a copy. Like I said, we did this cheap. This wasn't made to last. It was made to be sent to the copyright office. So basically, oh, go ahead, Kale.
no, that's interesting. But also, Hound just said he has a Xerox copy of the CCC, not one of the 40, but a copy of the copy, which I think is really funny.
Hell yeah, and I love the fact that he has it. I wish I had one too. So there are only, I think the official number is 42. It's between 40 and 42.
I think it's 52. No, New 52.
And so all the creators who were involved got one. They sent one to the copyright offices. They sent one to a person who at the time was like a major publisher of one of those like magazines that talks about comics, just to prove the existence of the material. Now, I managed to find the Canceled Comics Cavalcade online, and so I read what I could. These stories, by and large, were not good. And if this is an example of the kind of books that DC was putting out at the time, then it's really no surprise to me that they were losing the battle with Marvel and imploded. Like they were pretty bad, I thought. And this is not work that was rushed to completion to fit into the CCC. This is the work that was coming out of the explosion. And I thought it was bad. I wonder if Atomic Hound disagrees with that perspective, but I couldn't find myself in them. I'm a modern reader. My sensibilities and tastes are not the same as they were back then for people who were reading books at the time, but I was not a fan of what I read.
You would not like Crisis on Infinite Earths then.
Maybe not. It's sad. If you look at the cover, maybe it's hard to tell because it's in black and white. But if you're watching on YouTube, if you look, those are all the creators just getting hit by a car. And the one on the right says, what I can't even read it because it's so tough to read. But it says Unemployment Inc. or something to that nature. So it was a joke for the creators. It was a joke for the staff. Might as well have fun with it, I guess.
Did DC ever put this out as a collector's edition further down the line?
No.
Like, I feel like they would be greedy enough to do that. You know, like, let's make money on this thing now.
So, no to that, but some of the stories did find their way into back matter in other series and titles. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's unfortunate because diversity was cut. A lot of characters that were women, minorities, their books were culled from DC's line. Characters that didn't really have a chance at success. One of the most fascinating things that I learned in doing this, and to be totally honest, one of the major reasons why I wanted to do this in the first place was because Larry Hama was one of the creators who was fired during this time. Of course, Larry Hama is known for G.I. Joe, right? But what I love Larry from is a book that was supposed to be a DC comic that ended up not being one. Bucky O'Hare. Does anyone here know Bucky?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. And Bucky O'Hare. There's some great action figures of Bucky O'Hare out there.
I love Bucky O'Hare. The Bucky O'Hare arcade game was my favorite when I was a kid. And I didn't know until I started doing research for this project, that it was originally supposed to be a DC comic.
Oh, yeah. Bucky O'Hare. Yeah.
The proto Rocket Raccoon, almost like a Star Fox character before Star Fox is a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's sad because DC changed a lot after this. DC became a lot more corporate. The environment in the offices wasn't fun anymore. Creators talked about how it used to feel like a party at DC's offices.
Yeah.
It was open communication. Doors were open. People were available. It was fun. And after the implosion, there were less people, no happiness. The pizza party stopped. Everything changed.
Len Wein on the Nerdist Comics panels back in the day used to talk about how they would have like shirtless wrestling matches in the bullpen.
What?
Yeah, they were having a blast. Maybe they're having too much
Yeah.
fun.
Sound like it.
You guys don't wrestle your coworkers shirtless?
I haven't
Not
done that with
regularly.
any of you guys yet.
I
know
if
Marcos
we had a
tried.
bullpen. So quickly, I've just been curious to see if one of these canceled comic cavalcades is out there. So it looks like someone had it at one point. I can't tell the date on this webpage, but it looks like it's selling or sold or whatever for £1,500.
For us
So probably-
dumb American idiots, what's that?
I mean, probably $2,000.
Not as expensive as I would have guessed for the limited quantity that there is.
So there's a reason for that. it's very difficult to ensure the authenticity of these.
Yeah. Especially since they were Xeroxed in the first place.
Right. I mean, I could see it. I guess like maybe someone wouldn't want to pay $2,000+ for even a real copy, but again, it's difficult to authenticate them unless you're buying it directly from one of the people that had it originally. You probably can't know that you have a real one.
It also says it's a very rare reprint set. So it's probably like Hounds. It's a
Yeah.
a what's it of a what's it.
Right. If it's a reprint, then it's not real. It's not authentic.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
The facsimile edition of CCC.
Yes, yes. So for her part, Jenette Kahn said this about the implosion. Comics didn't keep up with inflation, which also added to its disposable quality. If we raised cover prices, that would be a start of many, many kinds of changes we had to do to get comics as an art form. She's saying that comics were disposable. She's saying that the perception of people at the time was that comics were junk. Junk food for kids. Not different than McDonald's. She wanted to turn comics into filet mignon. She wanted comics to mean something. She led the charge as far as making the paper stock better, because then people wouldn't want to throw them away the way they did before. The reason why there are so few of the rarest comics ever, like Action Comics #1, is not just because it was so long ago, but also because the paper quality was so bad that a lot of people's red copies are just deteriorated. They're not good quality. She wanted to change that. She said it was an experiment that came too early. I think it's an experiment that came too late. I think that comics should have cost more to keep up with the Time magazines of the world, to show people that they matter, that they're worth having on your shelf. But as we know, it took years for the standard comic price to become $1, let alone $2. What are the profit margins on that? In 1990, whatever, if I remember correctly, Image Comics put comics at $1.25. 90s.
But do you think that the increase in price would then translate to people saying, "Oh, this is of more value"? Like if the mindset is this isn't the like we're not getting our bang for our buck here, and they're increasing the price, like it's still to me it sounds like the thinking is the consumer still feels it's disposable, and now they're disposing of $1 or $1.25 instead of 50 cents.
I also wonder if you extrapolate from there, we'd be drawing the line at $7.99, a couple years ago, if we had made things expensive way back when.
Well, I think that, again, it's, I'm open to being wrong about this, but my opinion is that the perception of comics had to do with the presentation of comics. And the presentation of comics was that it was cheap, that it was for kids. And that profit margin didn't exist for the grocery stores. It didn't exist for the newsstand. So they stopped carrying it. They kept carrying Time because Time was worth having on their shelf. We just talked about the Walmart books at $7 not even being worth Walmart carrying. To me, if comics became more expensive earlier and story quality and page quality, paper quality increased at the same time, then it might have attracted a more serious reader. It might have attracted someone who thought of it as an art form. We're still struggling to get people to take comics seriously to this day. It's 2023. One of the things I'll never forget about Marco, one of the first things he said was that in his culture, in his family, comics were seen as immature. Am I accurate on that?
Yeah, low art. It wasn't worth time.
Right. We've been fighting that war since the inception of comics. And the price and the paper quality and the quality of the creativity all are factors in that. Now, I want to close this by saying some words about a person that this is the biggest thing I got out of this whole DC implosion history has been about Jenette Kahn and what an incredible woman she was, or is, excuse me. And the impact on comics that she had. Someone that I think doesn't get nearly as much respect or admiration or coverage as they should. So because that doesn't happen elsewhere, I'll do it here today. Jenette Kahn was a legitimate trailblazer. She is responsible for so much of DC's rebound from the implosion in the 80s. Limited series, more mature themes, and the British invasion all happened under her purview. She became the editor-in-chief of DC in '89 and oversaw the rise and fall of Vertigo and Milestone, which are two publishing initiatives whose impacts are still felt to this day. We have a very different comics industry if it's not for Vertigo, in my opinion.
100% agreed.
She was a champion for creators' rights, advocating for and delivering on royalties and other things that gave creators a financial stake in their book's success. If it wasn't for that, creators like Alan Moore, creators like Mark Miller, creators whose names ring out even now, may not have made the jump across the pond to work for DC. And there's a reason why they went to DC directly. And it's because of these kinds of things that Jenette was doing. When Jenette started at DC Comics, there were 2 women on staff. 2. She started at 28 years old in 1976, in January of 1976. The first woman and the youngest person to become president of a division.
That's wild.
When she left DC Comics after 27 years in a leadership role, almost half of the staff were women. And quite frankly, we know and seen how women were treated after she left. We've heard the stories. We know all about it. Eddie Berganza was a piece of shit who preyed on women and kept them out of editorial for Superman. Jenette Kahn deserves a lot more credit for the things that she did and the impact that she had on the comics industry. And she's since moved on, and she's done film producing and things of that nature. So she's still seeing a lot of success in other venues. But I think the thing that she did that people will remember her for most is what she did at DC. And the implosion, which some would argue is ultimately her fault, is a blip on the radar in a larger career that, in my opinion, puts her on the Mount Rushmore of important people to comics, particularly to DC Comics. So I just want to say thank you to Jenette Kahn for all the things that you've done to make comics what they are. And that's where we're going to leave it on the DC implosion. Was this fun?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Good stuff. Good to reflect on, I think, and especially how we started the conversation. It's good to reflect on how things have changed, maybe things haven't, and how a lot of the problems are still being solved.
Or not being solved.
Or getting exacerbated.
Yeah, ignored. I had a lot of fun doing this. I had a lot of fun researching this. I learned a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to present this to you guys. Thank you for your patience. Thank you 3 for your patience and allowing me to do this. And the audience for supporting it and showing up and saying you enjoy it, asking for it. You know, in the lull period between Twilight of the Superheroes and this, one of the most sent in comments was, what's next?
Yeah.
When we did our survey, that I'm very grateful that people responded to. One of the things that people said a lot was they wanted more of that kind of storytelling here on the podcast, and I'm just very thankful to have the opportunity to do this. And hopefully we can do more. You guys let us know if you want it.
And what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.